Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, March 11th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the Democratic Party and their Senate group reserving a $239 million ad buy across a number of competitive states that reveals to us where the Democratic Party sees their pathway to maintaining Senate control and which states they're going to be investing in the most amount of money in this coming election cycle. Now, this comes as President Biden and his re-election campaign pledges tens of millions of dollars in these key battleground states, many of which have coinciding Senate elections that will determine the balance of power, of course, for this upcoming Congress. When we take a look at where Democrats are spending their money, it also tells us a little bit about what they're thinking in terms of competitiveness, what they think will be more competitive and less competitive, and how much money they are spending relative to the population and the competitiveness of the presidential election. And so what we find here is that a lot of this is about the Democratic Party playing defense. Rather than going on the offense as they did in the 2022 Senate elections, this is all about playing defense. Democrats are defending territory in a significant number of states that Donald Trump won either in the 2016 election or in the 2020 election, and it makes all the difference this time around. Because back in 2018, Democrats saw the true force of this Senate map and how favorable it was to the GOP. Despite it being an overwhelmingly Democratic year, Democrats won the national popular vote this cycle by roughly 8 percentage points. They still lost roughly 2 seats across the Senate. And that was a net 2 seats. They actually did lose more seats than 2. They did pick up 1 in the state of Arizona, counteracting that. They also were able to maintain Democratic control across a number of these states and flip the state of Nevada. But regardless, though, when you take a look at the 2012 map, it actually seems very, very different. And that's why this time, Democrats are so worried. Because between 2012, we can actually take a look here and compare the election cycles. It'll show you exactly what partisanship did to these Senate races, especially in the more competitive ones. Looking at the race in 2012 versus 2018, states like West Virginia swung by 21 points to the right. Indiana swung by 12 points to the right. Missouri by 22 points. North Dakota by 12 points. Florida even by 13 points. And the reason why that matters is because it narrowed down these Senate races in states that Donald Trump won in 2016, enough so that Democrats no longer had a chance at victory, which meant that Democrats were losing Senate seats despite the year being beneficial for them. And that's again because this Senate map is so lopsided in favor of the GOP because Democrats are constantly playing defense. But that's exactly what they're focused on here. Defense is how they win. And that's because in 2022, Democrats, as I mentioned, expanded their Senate majority by winning 51 seats to the U.S. Senate with their flip in Pennsylvania and every other state staying the same. Democrats won Georgia, they won New Hampshire, they won Arizona, they won Nevada, they won Colorado. They pretty much did well in all of the Senate races that were competitive, only losing the 2 notable ones of Wisconsin and North Carolina, but that honestly was expected. So looking at this map, we now take a look and say Democrats are defending all of this territory. How are they going to spend their money? We know that they're spending roughly $250,000 in these states. So where are their focuses? And we're going to talk about that now. Now, to kick things off straight off the bat, the Democratic Party is completely giving up the state of West Virginia. The state of West Virginia is a state where Joe Manchin won in the last election in 2018 by roughly 3.2%, and this time around, Joe Manchin does not seem to look like he has a chance of victory, and so he decided that he's going to take a step back, retire from the United States Senate, and that will be the end of his political career. And so West Virginia, Democrats aren't spending a single dollar in from this national Democratic group, which means it's automatically going to the GOP. The incumbent popular Republican governor, Jim Justice, is also running in this state. And so right now, Democrats are just saying, West Virginia is far gone, which means we're starting at a baseline now of 50-50, assuming everything goes correctly for the Democratic Party. And so when we go down and dive deeper into how this money is being spent, I think a lot of it too, we have to recognize that because President Biden will have an influence or maybe will pull back from some of these states like Montana and Ohio, that will be helping Democrats later down the ballot, helping Democrats, including these Senate races. But for right now, this is the individual focus and the individual, priorities of the Democratic Senatorial, Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DSCC, that is focused on electing and re-electing Democrats. But as we know and seem so now, right? We're talking about defense and we're talking about re-election rather than election. And so they start off strong. in the state of Ohio, $65 million being allocated to television ads in Ohio. Sherrod Brown, the incumbent Democrat here, who won in 2018 by a margin of just 6.8% against a Republican who honestly did not campaign too heavily. I will say I look at this and I'm a bit cautious to believe that it means that Sherrod Brown is this electoral juggernaut for the state of Ohio. But he does do well in this state. He did well in 2012, but Ohio is certainly a state that is very, very competitive. And Donald Trump did win it in the last election by roughly 8 to 9 points, both 2016 and 2020. And so I, definitely err on the side of caution there for the Democratic Party. But that's why the $65 million is coming in strong. The next state where they're going to be spending the most actually might surprise some people, but it is the state of Pennsylvania, where Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat, is running for re-election. Now, Bob Casey is, in fact, an electoral juggernaut. In 2018, he won by 13 points. In 2012, he was able to win on the same ballot as Obama by 9 points. In 2006, he was able to oust incumbent Republican Senator Rick Santorum by 17 points. And a lot of that has to do with his family's legacy. Bob Casey and the Casey family is a very well-known, respected, and adored name across the state of Pennsylvania, and there's no reason to see why that should be tremendously different, especially with the backing of $40+ million to this Senate race. I think it also just underscores the urgency around the state of Pennsylvania in particular. Honestly speaking, Bob Casey doesn't need as much money as somebody like Alyssa Slotkin in the state of Michigan or Tammy Baldwin in the state of Wisconsin. But I think there's also the dual effect here, where they know that Bob Casey has been consistently outperforming President Biden, that when voters get out to the ballot box and vote for Bob Casey, they actually may be more inclined to vote for President Biden. Bob Casey might be carrying President Biden across the finish line with his popular Senate bid. And so by investing $42 million in this race, they're knocking two birds with one stone. But I also will say that it might just recognize, too, that the National Democratic Party is not taking the Rust Belt for granted. This amount of money being spent in Ohio and Pennsylvania and what you will see in Wisconsin and in Michigan shows that they are taking the solidification of the blue wall very, very seriously. If you were looking at this from the perspective of the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign, it might be very different. You might have seen that Democrats weren't investing as much into Pennsylvania, investing as much into Wisconsin and Michigan. These are popular incumbents for Democrats, but I don't think they're leaving anything to risk, especially this cycle. So $42 million being spent to the state of Pennsylvania. Now, Wisconsin and Michigan are also going to get $14 million each. Granted, Pennsylvania is roughly double the size of the state of Wisconsin, and so it makes sense that they're getting less money, but Michigan is roughly the same size as the state of Pennsylvania, just a little bit under. And so what you find here is that I think Michigan Democrats actually might be a little bit more confident in. You also might expect that the Biden campaign will be announcing a lot of money being spent in this state. And I think right now, too, what they're focused on is that this primary contest still isn't over in Michigan. I think their focus here is getting through with the nominee and then allocating tens of millions of dollars, because I think what you're looking at is them creating ads for whoever the candidate might be, general anti-Republican ads, less pro-individual Democrat ads, and more so broad topics and discussions about voters in Michigan. I think that's why you see a little bit of a pullback from the state of Michigan. Wisconsin, I think you're also seeing a little bit of pullback just because Republicans can't field a strong candidate. I think at the end of the day in Pennsylvania, Dave McCormick, while not a phenomenal candidate, is better than what the Republicans have in Wisconsin. I know people are talking about the Wisconsin Senate race. All of a sudden, it's going to be interestingly competitive. I really don't think it's going to be that competitive. When you take a look at the California businessman who's running in the Republican primary, Eric Hovde, I believe that's how you pronounce it. He's a hedge fund manager, right? He's not from the state of Wisconsin in the way that Tammy Baldwin is, and honestly is going to pick up a lot of, attacks for being someone who is a carpetbagger and also someone who just, quite frankly, doesn't know how to win an election. When you look at the bench here as to who Republicans could have pulled, they could have had David Clark or Scott Mayer, or honestly any of the sitting U.S. representatives like Mike Gallagher or Brian Steele or Tom Tiffany. And a large reason as to why they don't want to run for Senate is because they know they're going to lose. Tammy Baldwin is a very strong candidate, and I think the reason why you have poor candidate quality in Wisconsin is because Tammy Baldwin has been able to defeat her opponents by tremendous amounts in years past. And I think what they saw in 2018 was a warning sign that she's not someone who can be messed with. But $14 million is going to her anyways. Then you have $23 million going to the state of Arizona. This is the race that is currently held by Kyrsten Sinema. She's an independent who caucuses with Democrats. She recently announced that she's not running for re-election, and thus I think that's the big reason why you're seeing $23 million being funneled into this race. It's now a head-to-head with Kari Lake, who's the failed 2022 Republican nominee for governor. And so I think Democrats are at a point here where a lot of this is also going to be trying to benefit the down-ballot races when it comes down to the presidential election. When it comes down to the House races, some of the most competitive House races in Arizona are here. And it's honestly one of the most interesting states because the state legislature is up for grabs. The state Senate, right? State House and Senate, very competitive, very, very narrow. Democrats could reasonably flip it. The Senate race here, very competitive. Some of the most competitive House races in the country are happening in Arizona's 1st and 6th. The presidential race, Arizona was the second closest state in the 2020 election. There's a lot of reasons to invest in this state, a lot of reasons to focus on these, competitive down ballot races, and Democrats are recognizing that, and it shows with their pocketbooks. Now, looking over at where the Senate Majority PAC has already announced money, I made videos about this just a few weeks ago. Jon Tester getting $45 million. Now, Jon Tester's running in a very, very small state. What I want you to also take a look at, too, is the relationship between population and the amount of money that's being allocated to these states. For instance, in a state like Pennsylvania, you're seeing $42 million for a state with 20 electoral votes. To compare that to Montana, which is getting $45 million, Montana has just 3 electoral votes. Democrats are coming in strong and hot with money and cash to drown their opponents in these competitive states. And that's what's happening in Montana and what I think Democrats are trying to do all across these states. The next state that they have also invested money in is $36 million in the state of Nevada. Nevada is roughly double the population of Montana, but less than every other state that has, is on this target map, of course, besides the state of Montana here. But it goes to show that Democrats are willing to spend insane amounts of money on these races if it means they have a higher chance of retaining them. And it shows, too, where their priorities are. In terms of the states that they are defending, this is it. They aren't investing heavy amounts of money into states like Minnesota and Virginia and Maine and New Mexico, and I think that's for good reason. Democrats know that these states at the end of the day are going to go blue practically no matter what. Larry Hogan announced in the state of Maryland, and you see nothing going there by the Senate Majority PAC. Why? Because they know that Larry Hogan is not going to be the next senator from the state of Maryland. It's all of these states where I think Republicans are trying to shift focus away from the true and intense battlegrounds because they know that Democrats are honestly very smart with their money. They out-fundraise Republicans at nearly every level. They outspend Republicans at nearly every level. And what we know about Congress and what we know about American elections is that money speaks. And when you look at a state like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and if Republicans come up short of the Senate races here by 1, 2, 3 points, it's going to ring in their heads constantly. What if we just spent a little bit more money on these states? What if we had forced Democrats to spend money elsewhere? And I think they're trying to do that, but seemingly unsuccessful because Democrats are doing well with where they're doing strategy. But of course, defense is one thing, the offense is the other, and interestingly enough, Democrats aren't entirely shying down from the idea that they might be able to flip some states in this upcoming election cycle. The focus in those 2 states that they're looking at are Florida and Texas, states where Democrats haven't had much luck in recent elections, but I think it's also here to be the focus of the fact that it is the best opportunity to pick up a seat, which I think speaks volumes to the lack of opportunities that there is to pick up seats, but also it allows them to just get Republicans also spending money in these states. Republicans are spending money in states like Maryland, but Texas and Florida are not nearly as partisan red as Maryland is partisan blue. Florida went to Trump by 3, Texas went to Trump by 6. Maryland went to Biden by 25. And so with Democrats targeting Texas and Florida, I'm very interested to see what the response is here from the GOP. Because on one hand, I could see them completely ignoring it and saying, these states are never going to go blue. But on the other hand, they are reminded of what happened in 2018 when they went sleeper mode in the state of Texas and Ted Cruz won by just 2.6% against a little-known congressman from the state of Texas. 2.6%. In the last election, Ted Cruz won by 15.8%. And so in 2024, maybe it could be just as competitive. In Florida, Rick Scott defeated Ben Nelson by a margin of 0.12%. It was exceptionally narrow, and it was one of the closest and most competitive races of this election cycle, and honestly, of the past 4 to 5 years. And so looking at this map here, Democrats seem to be taking a page out of their playbook from 2018. Go strong with defense, funnel in tens of millions of dollars in the Rust Belt, in the Sun Belt, and in the states like Montana where they need to maintain control, and invest, not now, not just for this election, but also for the future in states like Florida and Texas, or maybe in 4 to 8 years down the line, the investments made now and the willingness to compete and continue competing in these states might eventually pay off. It did for Democrats in Arizona and Georgia, and in this long-standing effort to flip the Sun Belt towards the Democratic Party. Shift over white suburban voters in these Sunbelt regions, in these Sunbelt states. And in many cases, it has absolutely paid off. And so I think they are going a little bit further than just this upcoming Senate races when it comes down to where they're investing and why. But when I take a look at this map, if I was to look at it from the standpoint of the Democratic Party, I would look at it fondly, because it means that they aren't leaning into this idea that Trump's going to make Minnesota and Maine and New Mexico and Virginia competitive, that Larry Hogan's going to make Maryland competitive, that Kathy Hochul's going to make New York competitive. We need to stop that, because it just simply is not true. And Democrats have their sights set in a phenomenal way, financially speaking, that Republicans need to combat quickly, because the earlier you get these ad reservations, the cheaper they are and the more difficult it becomes for Republicans to respond to them immediately. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.